Welcome to the True Detectives podcast, where we unpack the wildest true detective stories that you won't believe happened. I'm Adrian Smith, and today we're joined by the incredible Dr. Julia Jones to dissect a case so bizarre it'll leave you chilled to the bone. Get ready, because we're about to plunge headfirst into a world of frozen fear, relentless pursuit, and a chilling question. Where's the line between justice and vengeance? And trust me, you'll want to stick around because this case is packed with twists you won't see coming. But before we get started, if you're loving these crazy stories, hit that follow button and give us a rating. It really helps more people discover the show. Now let's get into it.
It's always exciting to be here. This case is especially intriguing because it really delves into the psychological scars left by trauma, not just on the victims, but on the detective trying to piece it all together.
Okay, so picture this. A city paralyzed by fear. A mysterious killer is turning their victims into these macabre ice sculptures, leaving them in public places like some kind of horrific art exhibit. We're not talking about just frozen bodies here. I mean, meticulously crafted ice coffins capturing the victims' last terrifying moments. What goes through someone's mind to even conceive of something like that?
The theatricality of it all is what's so fascinating. It screams control, a need to broadcast a message. You almost get a sense of twisted artistry from these gruesome displays.
Absolutely. It's like they're playing a role, right? And leading the charge to stop this icy reign of terror is Detective Elena Cruz. They call her Ice Queen. She's known for being unflappable. Brilliant. But this case, it's personal. Years ago, her sister vanished without a trace, a wound that's never truly healed. So you can imagine how this case, with its frozen victims, is bringing all those unresolved feelings back to the surface.
That brings up a really interesting point. How much does personal baggage affect a detective's judgment, especially in a case that mirrors their own trauma? It could be a source of relentless determination, but could it also lead them down the wrong path, blind them to crucial details?
You're hitting on a really crucial point. And as the body count rises, the pressure on Detective Cruz and her partner Ben is immense. Every crime scene is meticulously clean, no forensic evidence, no fingerprints, nothing. It's like this killer evaporates into thin air, leaving behind only these frozen masterpieces and a city on edge.
The lack of physical evidence is definitely a hurdle, but here's where the killer's signature, those frozen poses, the public display, actually becomes a window into their mind. It's like a psychological fingerprint. It suggests something deeper is at play, a need to control the narrative, to create a spectacle of fear. And it's through that lens that we can start to understand them.
And then a stroke of luck. A tiny iridescent blue thread, almost invisible to the naked eye, found beneath the victim's fingernail. It's this tiny clue that unravels the entire case, leading Detective Cruz to, of all places, a costume warehouse. Who would have thought?
The costume warehouse is a fascinating piece of the puzzle. It connects the killer's theatricality to their preparation, almost like a blueprint for terror. You have to wonder, were these frozen displays a kind of twisted dress rehearsal for the actual murders? And what role does that blue thread play in this macabre production?
Exactly. And that's where things start to get really interesting, because what Detective Cruz finds in that warehouse is something straight out of a nightmare. Mannequins frozen in poses that mirror the victims, a heart-pounding chase through a labyrinth of costumes, and finally, a confrontation with the killer, and the revelation of their identity is the last thing anyone expects.
The tension in that moment must have been suffocating. It's a situation where a detective's ability to stay calm and focused is the difference between life and death. One wrong move could have had devastating consequences.
Absolutely. And the killer's identity adds another layer of complexity to this already bizarre case. We're not talking about some hardened criminal or a shadowy figure lurking in the darkness. It's a young woman, driven by a need for vengeance so profound it's twisted her entire world.
Vengeance. It's an emotion so potent it can warp even the most rational mind. It's a stark reminder of how destructive, unresolved grief can be, how it can fester and transform into something monstrous.
It turns out her brother was killed in a hit and run, and the driver got away with it. Her victims, they all bear a striking resemblance to her brother, those meticulously crafted, frozen poses. It was her way of recreating that accident, forcing the world to see and feel her pain.
It's a chilling example of how trauma can manifest, how a yearning for justice can become distorted, mirroring the very crime that inflicted the pain in the first place. Her victims become stand-ins for her brother. And the ice, a symbol of her frozen grief, her inability to let go.
This is where things take a turn, because that confrontation at the warehouse becomes a turning point for Detective Cruz, too. She's face to face with her own unresolved trauma, forced to choose between succumbing to the same vengeful impulse that drives the killer, or holding on to the principles of justice she's sworn to uphold.
This is the heart of the dilemma, isn't it? A detective, a symbol of law and order, grappling with the same raw emotions that fuel the killer. It underscores just how fragile the line between justice and vengeance can be, and how the choices we make in those critical moments define who we are.
Welcome back to the True Detectives podcast. Before we went to our short break, we were discussing the intense confrontation at the costume warehouse and how the killer was actually revealed to be a young woman, driven by a burning need for revenge over her brother's death. That warehouse scene was a real turning point in the case, wasn't it? It's where we see Detective Cruz, the Ice Queen, start to thaw. We see the human vulnerability beneath that tough exterior.
You can practically feel the internal struggle going on inside of her. On the one hand, she's dedicated her life to upholding the law, to bringing criminals to justice. But on the other, she understands the killer's pain, that desperate yearning for payback that's consuming her.
And remember, Detective Cruz is still haunted by the unsolved disappearance of her own sister. So she's not only battling the demons of this case, but also her own unhealed trauma.
This is where the case takes on a whole new level of psychological depth. Cruz is forced to confront her own demons, while simultaneously trying to prevent the killer from being consumed by hers. It's a fascinating dynamic.
And in the midst of this crisis, Detective Cruz makes a crucial choice. Instead of resorting to force, she chooses empathy. She doesn't speak to the killer as a cop would to a suspect, but as one human being to another, acknowledging her pain.
It's a powerful moment of connection, a testament to the power of empathy, even in the darkest of situations. Cruz validates the killer's feelings without condoning her actions, a delicate balancing act between understanding and justice.
And you know what? Her approach works. The killer hesitates. She lowers her weapon. For a brief moment, that hardened facade crumbles, and we see a glimpse of the scared, grieving girl hidden beneath.
It just goes to show that human connection can be a powerful force, even in the face of such horrific circumstances. Detective Cruz's willingness to see the humanity in the killer, to try and understand what drove her to this point, that ultimately diffuses the situation and opens a door to a different kind of justice.
And that's when Detective Cruz's partner, Ben, steps in. He makes a promise to find the hit-and-run driver, to ensure he faces the consequences of his actions through the legal system.
That promise is crucial. It offers a glimmer of hope not just to the killer, but maybe even to Detective Cruz herself. It reinforces the idea that justice can be served without resorting to vengeance, without adding more violence to an already tragic situation.
And it leads to a resolution that, in its own way, brings a sense of closure to everyone involved. The hit-and-run driver is tracked down, arrested, and finally faces justice for the death he caused. The killer, while still facing consequences for her actions, finds some peace knowing that her brother's death won't be forgotten.
This is where the theme of accountability comes into play. True justice isn't about revenge. It's about taking responsibility. It's about ensuring that those who inflict harm are held accountable, regardless of their reason.
It's a stark reminder that the legal system, though imperfect, is still the most effective way to achieve justice. It may not always be perfect, but it provides a structure for addressing wrongs and offers a path towards healing for everyone involved.
But it's not just about the legal outcome, is it? It's also about the psychological impact this entire ordeal has on the people involved. Detective Cruz, after confronting her own demons and choosing empathy over vengeance, comes out of this case fundamentally changed.
She's not the unbreakable Ice Queen anymore. The cracks in her facade have revealed a deep well of compassion and understanding, qualities that actually make her an even more effective detective.
It's a powerful illustration of how vulnerability is not a weakness, but a strength. It allows us to connect with others on a deeper level, to see the world through their eyes, and to find solutions that address the root causes of conflict and suffering.
And that's what makes this case so compelling. It's not just about solving a crime. It's about delving into the complexity of human emotions, those blurry lines between justice and vengeance, and the power of empathy to transform even the most dire situations.
It's a case that sticks with you long after the ice has melted, prompting us to contemplate the enduring questions about the human condition and the choices we make when confronted with darkness and despair. Welcome back to the True Detectives podcast. You know, as we delve deeper into this case, it's incredible how much this case has unfolded, right? We've seen how personal trauma can shape a detective's approach to a case, how grief can twist and warp into a thirst for revenge, and ultimately, how a single act of empathy can change the entire course of justice.
What strikes me is the recurring theme of the mirror image throughout this case. You have the killer recreating her brother's death through her victims, forcing the city to confront her pain.
And then you have Detective Cruz, staring into that same mirror, seeing her own unresolved trauma reflected right back at her. It's like they're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, two sides of the same coin.
It's a brilliant narrative device, really. It highlights how interconnected our experiences are, how our past shapes our present and influences the choices we make.
Absolutely. It makes you think about the far-reaching consequences of trauma, not just on the individual who experienced it, but on the community as a whole.
It's like that ripple effect. You see, when you throw a stone into a pond, the initial impact is obvious, but the ripples spread outward, touching everything in their path.
Right, exactly.
And in this case, those ripples extend beyond the victims and the killer. They touch Detective Cruz, her partner, the families involved, even the city itself.
It's true. This case also forces us to confront that blurry line between justice and vengeance. Both the killer and Detective Cruz are driven by a desire to right a wrong. But their methods, their motivations, they couldn't be more different.
That's the crucial distinction, isn't it? Justice is about fairness, about holding individuals accountable for their actions. Within a framework of laws, vengeance is personal, fueled by anger, pain, and a desire for retribution.
And while vengeance might offer a temporary sense of satisfaction, ultimately it just perpetuates the cycle of violence and trauma.
True justice, on the other hand, seeks to break that cycle. It aims to restore balance, hold those who cause harm accountable, and provide a path for healing and reconciliation for everyone involved.
This case is a powerful reminder that even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, there is always hope. Hope for healing, hope for justice, and hope for a future where empathy triumphs over vengeance.
It's a testament to the courage and resilience of those who dedicate their lives to pursuing justice, often at a great personal cost.
So as we wrap up our investigation into this chilling case, we leave you with this thought. How do we as individuals and as a society respond to trauma? Do we allow it to consume us, to drive us towards vengeance? Or do we choose a different path, a path of empathy, understanding, and ultimately justice? Let us know what you think in the comments below.
These are questions that deserve our careful consideration because the answers we find will shape not only our own lives, but the world we leave behind for future generations.
And that's all the time we have for today's episode of the True Detectives podcast. We hope you found this investigation as fascinating and thought-provoking as we did. If you enjoyed today's investigation, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave us a review. It really helps us out. And be sure to tune in next time for another chilling case. Until then, stay safe out there and keep those detective minds sharp.